Welcome, listeners. I have Mark Scullard with us today, and he is a senior director at product innovation at Wiley, where he has worked the past 2 decades to create engaging, research validated learning experiences that help organizations transform their culture. He earned a PhD from the University of Minnesota in counseling psychology and has written extensively on topics of leadership, personality, and interpersonal relationships. Welcome, Mark.
Hey, thank you so much, Julie, for having me on.
Well, I'm a big disc fan, and so I've used the Wiley products many, many times over the last, 15 years. I still remember when I was first exposed as a leader to disc and learning that I was a big D and just didn't know what to do with it. So I know that's something you're passionate about that we'll get to in the interview, but I thought where we'd start is just there's a lot of change going right now in the world. I mean, it's always constantly changing, but I know you have some helpful tools to kind of talk through how to meet people where they're at in this moment of change. And I think for a lot of leaders, they're really struggling with this, like what I keep hearing is like perpetual uncertainty
Yeah,
and
yeah.
change from AI to the political environment, et cetera. So I'd love us just to start there, Mark, of your take on change and how, DISC and other things can help with that.
Yeah, well, I'll go back maybe 18 months, and our consumer insights team was doing some research talking to not only managers, but to decision makers in organizations in HR and L&D and asking them, hey, what are you willing to, really, what are you willing to pay for because that's where the rubber hits the road, to bring in training for your managers and mid-level leaders in particular. And there were five topics that they identified, but one of, I think the one, I'm imagining the list, the results, the one that came up the most consistently was dealing with change. And
Mhm.
that was 18 months ago, and it's even gotten more pronounced since that time.
Oh, for
And so
sure.
and so what we did is I worked with the team, and we stepped back and said, all right, what's the best way to help managers and leaders navigate change? Because when you look up change management, there's a lot on communication, there's a lot on systems and processes, there's a lot on metrics, but there's not as much attention paid to the emotional part of helping uh, employees navigate that change. And if you don't get that right, well, you're going to have kind of a mess on your hands. All of that other stuff may go to waste. And I think one of the reasons that it doesn't happen is because emotions oftentimes make in the corporate space make people uncomfortable. But it's just messy. And so we really stepped back and looked at how can we help leaders and managers help their employees. And the framework we used was that very simple framework that most people listening to this have seen, is that change curve. And where you have this period of disorientation after a major change, where your morale drops, and different people experience this differently. It's not like the 5 stages of grief where it's proposed that you have this stage and then this stage, but it's disorientation, whatever that looks like for
Mhm.
you. And then a gradual period where you could imagine the slope of this change curve, where people reorient and then they hit a new normal. And really, our message to leaders is that you are not going to keep people from having that morale dip in the face of change. You can't. We need to process it, and those emotions that come with it are are crucial and a part of really processing that and doing it in depth in a way that's substantive, that will help you come out the other side. But what they can do is lessen the depth and the length of that adjustment period. And so you mentioned at the beginning we work with DISC, and so um, we really tend to focus on a particular type of diversity, which is diversity of personality. And one of the things that makes that really tricky for leaders is that the way that I deal with change is going to be very different from the way that you deal with change. And then also, like as a leader, I'm probably at a different point in the change curve. I've had access to information. I may have some
Yep.
autonomy that you don't have. But we kind of try to, one of the things that we really try to do is to come up with these relatively simple mental models to help managers and leaders go back to their work and to understand the differences around them. And so I can go into, if you're interested in
Well,
the really
something you
kind of the,
said, Mark, really stuck out to me. And I say this a lot because leaders that have been a part of the change decision, usually you're engaged before your employees are. And
yeah,
I see there's the senior leaders, especially C-suite types all the time. There's a disconnect of like, well, why are people being so difficult about this? Like, I've already thought this through, but that's the point. You've already had the ability to kind of go through that change curve and kind of grieve the past and let go of the past and embrace the future. And you also know the rationale for the decision. So I'm curious what you think about this, Mark. I'm not a change expert, but I get brought in on leadership allyship programs, diversity programs, and change is inevitably part of that process, I would argue, as we go through culture shifts and change. And the two things I try to remember or teach is I call them like the two W's. It's the why for the change and the WIIFM, like what's in it for me. And of course, as you talk about personality, different people like and process change differently. But I find those two strategies most often are missing when there's a problem with change being rolled out. It's either we haven't been really clear about why we're changing things or what's really in it? What are the benefits for employees impacted by the change? So I'm just curious your reaction on that or other strategies you'd offer.
yeah. And the why in particular is so easy to lose sight of. And particularly in these situations we're finding ourselves in now, there's a reason that change came up as the thing that HR managers and L&D managers
Mhm.
is because we're having these rapid changes and people are getting hit by another change before they've had a chance to recover from the last one. And it's
Mhm.
so easy for cynicism to set in. And one of the solutions to that, I think there's a bunch of things that organizations can do, but one of them is this transparency about the why. And it's the biggest picture why that leadership oftentimes, they do it in these vague terms.
Mhm.
But on the ground, what you're seeing as an employee is all these micro changes, and you don't see how they connect. And what leadership can do, I think, to help guard against some of that fatigue and cynicism and burnout is help tie it back to a consistent why at
Yeah.
the top. And so there is some consistency. Our mission has not changed. The way we're going about it has changed, and helping people see within that. And not only does that help with my, where to direct my efforts, but it helps me feel like I can predict some things, that things make sense, that things
Mhm.
because it's so easy to go into that place where like these people are idiots, like they're so out of touch, like they have no idea, like
Yeah, they haven't thought this
what,
through at all.
yeah, they haven't thought this through at all. And oftentimes I think that is the case, right? Like the ripple effects have not been
Yeah.
processed.
Yeah. Especially like how quickly we're going through change. So I thought, Mark, two kind of questions for you as we unfold. One, when you think about meeting people where they're at, a lot of times I talk about that in allyship. It's not about you. It's not about how
Yeah.
you want to be treated. It's about how the other person wants to be treated. I think Wiley has some really good philosophies around that through the lens of DISC, which for listeners, if you're not familiar with that, is kind of four main personality buckets. And there's obviously intersections between these. People are very complex and not one label. But I do think it's an interesting lens to think about change through personality type. And some people are like, we still go through that change curve, right? We still kind of collectively grieve or through that disorientation process. But some of us really like change and kind of go through that more quickly, usually, if we're bought in and doing the things you're talking about.
Yeah.
Other people are a little more resistant. And so I'm just kind of curious from a personality perspective, like
Yeah.
How should leaders think about change that way?
Yeah, and I was just thinking this morning about, Sam Altman got interviewed, I don't know, it was months ago or so, we were talking about that what AI is going to do to the labor market, him saying, well, if I was graduating, college right now, this would be the most exciting time to be alive. And it's like, well, that's because you're an entrepreneur, right?
Right.
And you kind of like the chaos, and you also you're I'm guessing, I don't know much about his personality, but I'm guessing he's willing to be consumed by his work. He's willing to
Mm-hmm.
for his work to basically be his life. A lot of those folks are that's not most people, and it's particularly not most people who get into a lot of the corporate jobs that we often talk, white collar jobs, but even the blue collar jobs as well. And so we stepped back, and we did some surveying and asking, what are the different things that you need when you're in a period of change? What do you naturally reach for? And oftentimes people do this without even thinking about it. It's just their emotional instinct. And so we have a group of people who, well, you mentioned yourself, you fall in the D quadrant. These are
Mm-hmm.
folks who tend to be really direct. They, willing to be assertive. And it may not surprise you, like a lot of the things they need during periods of change is a sense of control and
Yeah.
agency, is the
Mm-hmm.
freedom to determine their own course. Is I don't want to feel that these forces above me are just dictating. And so if in any way you can give them some influence in the decision making process, it doesn't need to be the whole thing. All right. And they also need to be convinced that the justification for the change meets their standards. And I think also like a little bit of the what's in it for me as well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's a group of people who we call the I style. These are folks who tend to be very outgoing and enthusiastic. You could probably easily get an image of that in your head. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes, what they report needing is a sense of, in during these periods of change, is a sense of connection and
Mm-hmm.
optimism. Is I The change is kind of tearing apart a lot of these relationships that I've had. And I'm often put into new situations with new people. Will give me chances to not necessarily vent, and because venting, even though it feels good, actually leads to worse outcomes, but at least connect with people over the change and
Mm-hmm.
help process. And then also a sense of optimism that things are going to get better. And that's not true for everyone. Like my wife is a very kind of CD style. And so any sort of overt attempt to spread optimism, she's like, no, you're
Wow.
trying to manipulate me. But different people react differently
Yeah.
to that.
Yeah.
We've
That's
got a
more the
group of,
challenging style, right? The
yeah,
CD is always a challenge for me. It's like, why are you challenging everything?
exactly. I think it's probably the most interesting of all of the
Mm-hmm.
styles. I married
Because
one to just to
they're
study them up
usually
close.
right. I have found like they usually really thought it through and their challenges are accurate, which is annoying to the idea of people that you're talking about. Because and I don't know, Mark, is there any of the personality styles, and we'll go through S and C, so
Hmm.
Mark covered D and I, but
Yeah.
um is there one that's wired more for change? Like I'm thinking in my head, D's and I's because they're more fast paced are more inherently inclined to go along with change, as long as they have the things you're talking about, like the clarity and the connection. But I'm just curious if there's one that you see being more advanced on change.
Yeah. I, the top of, if you look at this circle, and so for listeners, trying to imagine a circle, and it's two dimensions. We talk about DIS and C as four
Mm-hmm.
quadrants, but there's two dimensions because a circle's a two-dimensional. And so the two dimensions are up and down is people who are really active and assertive, really
Mm-hmm.
fast paced.
Mm-hmm.
Those are kind of at the top, the D and the I's. And then the bottom tend to be people who are really reflective and
Mm-hmm.
cautious. And so it very much that's correlates with how how accepting or desirable of you are of change. And that top of the circle, the D and the I think is very symptomatic of this behavioral activation system in the brain, a series of a network of structures and neural connections where I'm particularly attentive to what rewards are out there, what opportunities are out there. And so I'm open to the change. It's a very opportunistic, not in a bad way, but in a good way. The bottom of the circle, folks, is where I tend to fall, are their behavior is often much more reflective of what's called the behavioral inhibition system, which you can see in all sorts of mammals, but particularly in humans, right? It's this threat detection, and I'm cautious, I'm aware. And so one of the things that you do, all of us do when we sense we're in danger, is we bring things close. We get things stable. We minimize the number of variables around us so that we can respond and spot the change that might come in. And so I think there's, generally speaking, very much a more of an I'm reluctant to use the word openness, but I think some excitement around change towards the top of the circle and the bottom
Yeah.
of the change circle is, and there's a lot of benefits that come with this disposition towards stability. A lot of benefits that come to the organization for having these people there as well.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, totally. It's not right or wrong. It's not good or
Yeah.
bad. It's just what I really like to talk about DISC is it's the diversity of it. Like I worked with a group once, I'll never forget it. They had a D, an I, and a C, and I think a couple, and they were missing an S, the steady one. And one of the D's on the team goes, "Well, we don't want one of those people." It's like, okay, well, why not? What are we missing? Like, what perspective are we missing on the team? And how could that different perspective help us? And so we were able to kind of talk through it as diversity is a strength. And so when I work with teams that are really all dominant, all influence, all conscientious, or all steady, or very skewed, there are some challenges because you don't get the inherent benefits of the diversity of different perspectives on the team.
Yeah. And, I think if it's like a mature group of people, I think one way to think about maturity is this ability to recognize what the situation calls for and
Hmm.
to push yourself to do that thing. And so I think someone with a D style, who's very mature, is still going to, they could have a very extreme D style, but you're very mature about it. You recognize when the situation calls for empathy, for listening to the other person, and you've developed that over the course of your life. Someone who's very immature with that D style, they have no need for that. They just
That's an
see,
interesting way to think about it.
yeah,
Yeah, and the motivation still might be for the D to get the results, but they know to get the results, you have to be empathetic, take on other
yeah,
perspectives.
exactly. That we're working on, right? One of the projects that my team is working on right now is feedback, and with the with the D style in particular, tend to be very direct. And
Hmm.
the idea of watering it down or giving encouragement, like that's just going to make them not take it seriously, or it's not going to get that this is
Yeah,
what they're getting paid for. I should just be able to be direct and they should take it the way
yeah,
I mean it, right? And helping them understand for a less mature D to realize no, you're not going to get the result you want if that's your effect. And
yeah.
that's the path that I think to open their eyes to, okay, maybe I will change. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. Change within change. Walk us through the S and the C with change, if you could.
Yeah. So the S, this is where I fall. Those tend to be folks who are very patient, very accommodating.
Hmm.
And so as they tend to be towards that bottom of the circle, towards has a strong need for what stability and support. And so give them kind of the comfort and security of familiar people and routines. Don't take away all of my routines all at once and don't just erase them, is because we get attached to these things. Like we get attached to people, but we also get attached to our routines, to our things, to our desk, to our processes, right? And also reassurance that, like, hey, you're not alone in this, and things will work out, and that reassurance and that, and really clarity around expectations and what's going to come next. And that's kind of
Mhm.
feeding in that stability. And then with the C style, I think probably the best way to describe the C style is very analytical. Is
Mhm.
they tend to be both skeptical and reflective. And I think you
Mhm.
combine both those characteristics, you get someone who's very analytical. Their instinct is to step back and to think about the world, as opposed to the I style, whereas that tendency is to just really experiential, whereas just to jump
It just
in
feels
and
good.
and
Yeah.
feel, right? And maybe they overanalyze after the fact, but um, my mom is always able to do this, and I wish I had that ability. I can't turn off my analytical side if I wanted to, but really what these folks really crave during those times of change is information and understanding. And that's something that we all want, but the manager, the leader might not appreciate just how much information and understanding
Mhm.
that person with this C style wants. And so maybe the leader does a superficial level of it and doesn't realize, oh no, this person really wants to get into the details of why the changes are being made. I need kind of some time and some space to really process the impact of this change, and then opportunities to ask questions and to provide a little bit my own insight, because that information and that understanding, that allows us to create predictions. And if I'm a very independent, self-reliant person, and you
Mhm.
strip away my ability to make predictions about what's coming next, well, that's very disorienting and very disturbing for me.
Oh, yeah. Especially if you've thought it through and no one's taking your input, that you've thought through this process, if maybe someone else hasn't given it the same kind of analytical lens.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
sometimes like they could have thought that through, in a very limited, narrow way, but they can become fixated on that way that they've thought it through. And it's not until the leader has the conversation with them about the bigger picture and allows that person to explain all of their reasoning, go down that rabbit hole that they went down of why this is such a stupid decision, why it doesn't make any sense. And then once the person feels heard, that they feel like they've gotten it out, right? That's a relief, a burden of just carrying this stress. Then you can have a conversation of like, well, this isn't the only consideration. The thing that you've
Mhm.
gone down is legitimate, but here's X, Y, and Z. And so let's
Yeah.
broaden that perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, I'm taking a lot from this conversation. Like, it's really helpful to hear the research showing professional development dollars are being prioritized for things like change management. It sounds like feedback. I'm continually surprised, Mark, by like how much people need feedback models. Still, even like very mature organizations and mature leaders, things like situation behavior impact model and
Yeah.
thinking through different personalities still like is something that's new to folks. So it's good to know that those skills are being invested in. I'm curious, Mark, as we think about the future, and of course, AI is all the rage in the workplace right now. How do you think you brought up Sam Altman before, OpenAI's founder and CEO? Curious, like how you think AI through the lens of change and DISC and feedback and all these things that we're thinking about. What impact do you think AI is going to have on all of this?
Yeah. And of course, no one really knows for sure.
Right.
I I am both excited and very concerned about the both the scope and the breadth of the
Mhm.
changes that are going to come potentially with AI. And maybe it's going to be there's a too much hype around it, but I think there's a very good chance that it's going to be a very dramatic change that we're not preparing for right now. And if I think there's a couple of different perspectives on this. Some people, when they look at these new, they say, oh, every time there's been a new technology, well, it's displaced some jobs, but it's created new jobs. But I can't think of a technology that will have such a wide impact in such a short period of time. And so
Mhm.
the amount of disruption that potentially comes with that is something that I think we need to be having a national conversation with. I mean, depending on what
Mhm.
country you're in, like that country should be having
Mhm.
those conversations. And I don't see
Yeah.
that necessarily happening um, right now. I see a lot of concern about it, but I don't see a lot of solutions about it.
No.
Um,
It's kind
yeah,
of, it feels like a race to like get the best, invest in the best, have the thing that's marketable. I think I saw of the stock market increases this year, like 80% of it is due to AI companies. So yeah, it is an interesting time. It's like the internet, you could argue, had obviously a huge impact, but it happened over the course of several years. This
yeah,
feels very much like a light switch has been flipped. And what I would love to see, and I see this in my own business, is it has saved me like a lot of time, like a lot of time.
yeah.
These podcast interviews, usually by the time I put all the marketing materials together, write an article, do all the things, and we were talking a couple hours, and now I'm down to maybe 45 minutes per episode. And so that's just one task. I think about corporate folks that have automated tasks and
Yeah.
communications and everything. It's probably going to save you a good chunk of your time. And so isn't this an opportunity to recalibrate work hour expectations and get on something like the 4-day work week that we know is really, really powerful and has a lot of evidence-based outcomes to it. So I'm just
Yeah,
curious.
it is. I mean, because you hear things, like Bill Gates or other thought leaders in the space talking about, well, how great will it be that, hey, we can move towards a place where you actually have more free time.
Hmm.
Um, but the thing that they don't talk about is that people don't necessarily want a job. They want the income from the job. And so, hey, I think most of society is going to be fine. If like we move to a 3-day week, that's great. But I I don't think we're in a place right now
Yeah.
where organizations are going to be paying you for a 5-day week
Hmm.
when you're working 3 days.
Yeah.
And so a society where we have much more free time is great. But I think
Hmm.
there's probably this is probably out of sight of the scope of this conversation, but there's probably regulatory or government considerations on that.
Yeah.
I do see the pendulum, of course, always goes back and forth between who has more power in the work relationships in terms of labor and in terms of management. And a couple of years ago, we had the Great Recession or the Great Resignation, and employees were really fighting to keep employees happy, and the pendulum was swung over onto the employees, and now it's very much swung back. You
Hmm.
see those press releases about stocks that go up, that the AI stocks that don't go up, the ones they go up when they announce layoffs, right? We've moved from a time where
Hmm.
layoffs were received as a sign that the company was doing poorly. Now layoffs are a sign that, hey, we're progressing. And so one of the things I'm really interested to see is, will AI keep the pendulum over on the management side, and for how long? And will we
Hmm.
have go through a particularly long period? And when you have a long period, when you don't have that back and forth, which I think
Hmm.
naturally balances things out, where it's stuck in one position for years, maybe a decade, um, then you start to see some really institutional changes. And I think it will be really fascinating to see what those are.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what an interesting place to land, Mark. Appreciate all of your great insights today, and tell our listeners how they can follow and engage with your work.
Yeah, well, I work with Wiley, but the division that I work with is everything disk. And so if you go to everythingdisc.com, if you liked hearing about these personality stuff, there's more information there on that website. But the particular projects that I was talking about in terms of both feedback and managers, or feedback and navigating change, helping leaders and managers, that's under a project called Work Smart, which is a 1 hour, very quick, very easy to facilitate and prepare for session that managers can, HR can bring in and deliver to managers and leaders. And I've been very pleased with the reviews that we've been getting. So it's kind of an exciting time for us. So that's called Work Smart.
Okay. Sounds good. Well, Mark, thanks so much for your insights today.
Yeah, thanks a lot. It was great being able to talk.